Thank you very, very much. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be able to be here at St. Vincent's, which I consider one of my true homes, having spent 8 consecutive years here and having been formed in the great Benedictine tradition. I think we all come to realize that the older we get, and with the passing of time and the opportunity to reflect on our life experience, we come to see and understand with greater intensity the blessings that we were afforded many times early on in our lives. And I look back on that, and one of the great blessings that I give thanks to God for every day is the wonderful opportunities of education, not only in the Catholic education systems, and particularly Catholic high school, but so much on the Benedictine experience here at St. Vincent College and St. Vincent Seminary. And I have always said that, having reached 30 years of ordained ministry this past May, St. Vincent's prepared me not only very well for pastoral ministry and life in the church, but in a very wonderful way I would have never fathomed after I figured 8 consecutive years of undergraduate and a master's in systematic theology and a master's in divinity. I thought to myself, because there were in my time some classmates who were a little older, and I would often say to myself, oh my gosh, thank God I got all this done by 26. I can get out, get on with life, and never think that I ever have to worry about school or classes or tests again. And then, of course, the bishop says, I'd like you to do some further graduate study. And you go, oh my goodness, now I'm in the category of those who you always said I never wanted to be. But one of the things I so often say is, after many years of even being away from theological studies, the gift of St. Vincent's Seminary and its excellent academic programs gave me a foundation when I did my graduate work in canon law that was phenomenal. And it made me even appreciate more and more that gift of the Benedictine liberal arts education. And so I truly mean this. I am both humbled and honored to be here, to have this opportunity this evening to speak with you. And I also want to say that one of the things that was very influential to me was, along with the great academic background, was the wonderful pragmatic spirituality and pastoral experiences of the Benedictine monks of St. Vincent Archabbey. And as I give this talk, and as I was preparing for this talk, I have to tell you, 2 people came to mind. Now, one of them's sitting out there, and I'm sure critiquing. Father Justin, I have to tell you, my notes aren't yellow legal pads. They're white, and they're actually typed. But I thank Father Justin. My undergraduate degree was in philosophy. But Father Justin's systematic, logical approach to philosophy and teaching us to think systematically, and particularly his courses in Ethics 1 and Ethics 2, gave me, and I know many of my classmates, a magnificent Thomistic foundation. And that Thomistic foundation and that natural law understanding of philosophy not only allowed me to understand so much of the church's theological teachings, but it then allowed me a foundation to build upon and to see different ways of thinking, different theological positions, and even different approaches. But those approaches were able to be understood, and I think even greater appreciated, because of the foundation of which they were built upon. The second wonderful example I was thinking about as I was putting together this presentation was someone I know many of the monks remember, Father Joel Lieb. Father Joel Lieb was not only a magnificent biologist, but he was a true pro-life advocate. And many of you realize he not only helped us in the diocesan office of pro-life, but he was also a pastor of a parish. And Father Joel brought together that beautiful understanding of the discipline of biology with theology, and also had that great pastoral sensitivity to be able to proclaim these truths and these positions in a way in which he wasn't having a hammer and beating someone over the head, but through a very beautiful, authentic way of living and through a consistent message. He was able to work hard, not only for pro-life advocacy and respect for greater life, but even offered a course here in the college on critical life issues. And he was magnificent in his approach of how do we allow ourselves, as I thought about this more and more, how do we allow ourselves to be compassionate missionaries of respect for life? And so I acknowledge not only those two gentlemen, but also all of the great experiences here at St. Vincent. This past Saturday, I had the opportunity to attend our annual Respect Life breakfast in the Diocese of Greensburg. It's been a wonderful tradition that has been going on for many, many years. And in the most recent years, it has been sponsored by the Diocesan Council of the National Council of Catholic Women. And this opportunity to gather every October is not just a chance for the DCCW to promote their advocacy for a greater respect for human life from the moment of conception till natural death, but it's also an opportunity for people to gather together to support each other in this important cause and to come together in a very important spirit of prayer for a greater respect for human life. And I'm very happy to say that here in the Diocese of Greensburg in the last year, respect for life has been one of the great priorities that I have tried to bring to the Diocese of Greensburg. And we're very happy to have both a director of pro-life ministry in the diocese, Father Dan Carr, who actually received his STB in Rome and then continued his studies and received a licentiate at the St. John Paul II Center. And Father Dan is now helping us in the Office of Faith, Family, and Discipleship in regards to Respect Life activities throughout. But in addition, we have also brought on to board Carolyn Canezano. Carolyn is one of 17 children. And she comes from a Catholic family in California, and throughout her life has been a strong advocate for a greater respect for human life. And Carolyn is now also, through Catholic Charities of the diocese, handling particularly pro-life advocacy. So we have these two important people in positions in the diocese that are here not to serve themselves, but to serve you and to serve our parishes, our schools, and the people of the Diocese of Greensburg. So I want to first of all make sure that you're aware of that great opportunity, and I encourage you to avail yourself to those resources. But in the midst of this breakfast, one of the things that Carolyn has started early on in her position is she said, I wanted to get Catholic schools and catechetical programs into this arena of understanding and helping to learn a little bit more about the Church's position on respect for life. And so Carolyn developed an essay contest for our children, age appropriate for the different grade levels. And this October, the children are undertaking an essay contest. And the theme of that is they are to identify their pro-life hero. To identify their pro-life hero. And she announced this at the breakfast and was talking about it. And then, as many of you know, as you're getting introduced, people love to say something that sometimes will put you on the spot. And she turned to me and she said, as I welcome the bishop to the pulpit here, to the lectern, she said, I'm going to ask him, Bishop, who is your favorite pro-life hero? Thanks for the advanced warning there. I missed the memo. So I was sort of smiling and joking. And it was very interesting because I have to say, without hesitation, I got up and I said, well, I have a tag team. And she sort of looked at me and I sort of smiled and I said, I have a tag team if I were to name my pro-life heroes. And that's the tag team of Mother Teresa and St. Pope John Paul II. And I went on to explain why I had a tag team. I said, I think these are my heroes because they bring together, both in their work, both the church's theological and intellectual heritage and tradition and its pragmatic pastoral application. And as I make this presentation this evening, and having just come back from having a wonderful opportunity to meet with our Holy Father, Pope Francis, we had an opportunity as bishops, 180 of us were in the group that had the session. The Holy Father afforded us between an hour and a half and almost 2 hours of time. And as we went into the Clementine Chapel, he came in. And of course, you know what we were all expecting, the folder being handed to him by the MC and the prepared statements being read. And he sits down in a chair and he said, I've placed some microphones around the room. He said, the last thing you want is to hear me preach to you or give you a formal presentation. What I'd like to do is I would like to hear in the spirit of synodality from you as bishops. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? What complaints do you have? He said, the only thing I ask is that you're a little charitable on the complaint department. And he laughed. And we had a wonderful opportunity to gather around. But one of the things that the Holy Father instructed us as bishops was he said, you need to ensure that your ministry is with the people, that you are accompanying the people. And the Holy Father reminded us, he said, accompaniment doesn't mean you lead them over the cliff and go with them. But accompaniment is listening to them, journeying with them. And he used the wonderful example of Christ on the road to Emmaus, listening and talking and drawing people into finally a realization of the presence of Christ. And I think as I give this presentation that the context of our activity and our work must be truly missionary in nature. And this is very true with the Respect Life movement. More than ever, we have to be sensitive missionaries going out into a world. Both Pope St. John Paul, Benedict, and Francis used the term the new evangelization. How many times have we heard it? How many times have we used it? And sometimes maybe the great danger is we just sort of say it. But the new evangelization is really about being missionary disciples going out into the world. And I think about that more than ever in regards to our Respect Life positions today. We are going out in many ways into almost an uncatechized element of the world, into a very confused world, into a world that is hearing sound bites and is hearing the gospel of the world. And in many ways, that gospel can be very hostile toward life, especially the most fragile and the most vulnerable in our society. The unborn, the disabled, the poor, the homeless. And we are called to go forth with great courage and zeal and with great pastoral sensitivity to proclaim the truth, but to accompany people in coming and knowing Jesus Christ even more. And so tonight, one of the challenges that I think we face in our modern times and in our culture is this narrative that somehow the church is evolving in its position in regards to a respect for human life and the dignity of human life. And it's very clear that I think we have to understand first and foremost that the church's position is very consistent, and the church's position is one that is rooted in sacred scripture, in the magisterial teaching of the church, and in the 2 millennial lived experience of the church. And so one of the things that I had received recently, a couple of months ago, shortly after the Dobbs decision was made, was a letter from a woman who was from the diocese. And she wrote, she said, "I'm so glad to hear and to know that the church has changed its position on abortion and now sees abortion as being something that is acceptable." And of course, after I picked my part of my head up off the floor and put it back in, I thought to myself, isn't that amazing that that was the message and the communication or the understanding that she received? So it really got me thinking in regards to the pastoral letter, which copies are in the back. But what I'd like to do tonight is I'd like to, first of all, walk through something that I know for many of you who have done it much better than I and are much more trained scholars than myself know. But I think it's good to walk through this journey of the church's position, to not only renew and to remember and to remind ourselves of it, but to allow ourselves to revisit it, to reaffirm what we hold, what we believe, and what we profess. We start with the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And of course, the Catechism teaches us and states very clearly that since the first century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. This teaching has not changed and remains unchangeable. Direct abortion, that is to say, abortion willed either as an end or as a means, is gravely contrary to moral law. We see that in 2271 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. In response to those who say this teaching has changed or is of recent origin, or that we can have multiple positions as Catholics on this stance, I'd like to offer these facts. To be sure, knowledge of human embryology was very limited, as we know, until recent times. Many Christian thinkers accepted the biological theories of their time based on the writings of Aristotle and other philosophers. Aristotle assumed a process was needed over time to turn the matter from a woman's womb into being that which could receive specifically human form or even soul. The active formative power for this process was thought to come entirely from the man. The existence of the human ovum or egg, like so much of basic biology, at that time was unknown. However, such mistaken biological theories never changed the Church's common conviction that abortion is gravely wrong at every state. At the very least, early abortion was seen as attacking a being with a human destiny, being prepared by God to receive an immortal soul. The Roman Catholic Church has consistently condemned abortion, the direct and purposeful taking of the life of the unborn child. In principle, Catholic Christians believe that all life is sacred from the moment of conception until natural death, and the taking of innocent human life, whether born or unborn, is morally wrong. The Church teaches human life is sacred from its beginning because it involves the creative action of God, and it remains forever in a special relationship with the Creator, who is its sole end. God alone is the Lord of life from its beginning until its end, and no one under any circumstance can claim for himself or herself the right to directly destroy innocent human life. From the earliest times, Christians sharply distinguished themselves, and I think this is so important for us to understand, from the pagan cultures by rejecting abortion and infanticide. As you know, in the early life of the Church, many of the Christian positions and the ways of living stood up and in opposition, not only to the majority of people, but to the culture and the customs that were surrounding the infant and early church. We heard today in our daily Mass reading St. Paul even struggling with that as he is evangelizing the Gentiles on kosher food. And sometimes I think as we study theology, morality, we think about the church, sometimes we don't even begin to fathom how very countercultural the Christian message, and more so the Christian lifestyle, was against the backdrop of the Gentile pagan world. And so the respect for the sacredness of life in the womb doesn't just originate, as we know, in Christian thought. This respect has deep, deep Jewish roots. The ancient Jewish world was much different from the surrounding cultures of Palestine, where infanticide, infant sacrifice, and abortion were not uncommon. They were secularly tolerated by society. As a matter of fact, in some instances, not only were they tolerated, they were very much supported and promoted. For the Jewish people, and even to Orthodox Jews to this day, all human life has as its author the one God whose creative power produces the child in the mother's womb and brings it step by step to full life. The Old Testament revelation, which the Church inherited and accepted, gives clear evidence that life in the womb was considered as sacred. Moses proclaimed, "When you hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, all these blessings will come upon you and overwhelm you. May you be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. Blessed be the fruit of your womb, the produce of your soil, and the offspring of your livestock, the issue of your herds and the young of your flocks. Blessed be your grain bin and your kneading bowl. May you be blessed in your coming and blessed in your going out. How that respect for human life is integrated in the Jewish philosophy and theology of the totality, not only of the blessings being received by God, but God's creative hand in the ordering of the universe and the creation of all things and humankind's participation in that life. The Old Testament revelation, which the church also clearly understands, and an example that comes to the mother of Samson. As for the son you will conceive and bear, no razor shall touch his head, for this boy is to be consecrated to God from the womb. And how about Job, who states, did not he who made me in the womb make him? Did not the same one fashion us before our birth? In Psalm 193, verse 13, we pray, truly you have formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. The Old Testament also testifies how God had specially marked individuals for an important role of leadership from the first moment of their lives. And I quote from Sirach, beloved of his people, dear to his maker, dedicated from his mother's womb, consecrated to the Lord as a prophet, was Samuel, judge and priest. How about the prophet Isaiah? Hear me, O coastlands. Listen, O distant peoples. The Lord called me from birth, from my mother's womb. He gave me my name. He has made of me a sharp-edged sword and concealed me in the shadow of his arms. He has made me a polished arrow. In his quiver he hid me. You are my servant, he said to me, Israel, through whom I shall show my glory. How about the prophet Jeremiah? The word of the Lord came to me thus. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you. A prophet to the nations, I appointed you. Now, granted, some later rabbinic interpretations allowed for exceptions for abortion, and even in instances sometimes infanticide. But there was no consistent or prevailing justification. The overriding Jewish teaching upheld the sanctity of life of the unborn child. The Greco-Roman world at the time of our Lord, and in which Christianity grew, permitted abortion and infanticide. As a matter of fact, in Roman law, the two acts were really not distinguished because, as Roman law saw it, an infant did not have legal status until accepted by the pater familias, the head of the family. And until accepted, the infant was a non-person who could be destroyed. In some parts of the Roman Empire, abortion and infanticide were so prevalent that reproduction rates, believe it or not, were below the zero growth level. Sound familiar? Nevertheless, Christians upheld the sanctity of the life of the unborn child, not only because of the Old Testament revelation, as I've cited a few here in this speech, but also because of the mystery of the incarnation. And that is so important for us to realize. For Christians, how does God come to us, and how does he transform our world? Through the mystery and the beauty of the incarnation. The early Christians, as we know, believe, as we still do, that Mary had conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit, and through her, Jesus Christ, the second person of the most holy Trinity, consubstantial with the Father and true God, became also true man. No faithful Christian would ever deny that Jesus was a true person whose life was sacred from the first moment of his conception in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The story of the Visitation, as we all know so well, further attests to the sanctity of life in the womb and the personhood of the unborn child. As we know from the Gospel, Mary set out, proceeding in haste into the hill country to the town of Judah, where she entered Zachariah's house and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leapt in her womb. Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and cried out in a loud voice, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. But who am I that the mother of my Lord should come to me? The moment your greeting sounded in my ears, the baby leapt in my womb for joy. Blessed is she who trusted that the Lord's words to her would be fulfilled." Given the revelation of the Old and the New Testaments, with special emphasis on the mystery of the Incarnation, the Church, through the centuries, has condemned the practice of abortion. Several examples of teaching which span the first 300 years of our Church include, as we know, the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles, around 80 AD. And it asserted, "You shall not procure abortion, you shall not destroy the newborn child." The Epistle of Barnabas in 138 also condemned abortion. Pythagoras in 177, in a plea on behalf of Christians, which was a defense against paganism, emphasized that Christians consider as murderers those women who take medicines to procure an abortion, and he condemns the killer of children, including those still living in the mother's womb, where they are already the object of the care of divine providence. I love that phrase. Where they are already the object of the care of divine providence. Tertullian likewise asserted, to prevent birth is anticipated murder. It makes a little difference whether one destroys a life already born or does away with it in any stage. In the year 300, at the Council of Elvira, a local council in Spain, already the Church canonizes in its canons, Canon 63 of that council, a specific legislation condemning abortion. So as the legal tradition of the Church is growing, we see at its very roots these fundamental principles that are rooted in sacred Scripture and are already becoming a strong and coherent and consistent part of the Church's teaching. In the 5th century, we know that abortion at every stage was affirmed as condemned by the great bishop and theologian St. Augustine. And he knew well the theories about human soul not being present until some weeks into pregnancy. And because he used the Greek Septuagint translation of the Old Testament, he also thought the ancient Israelites had imposed a more severe penalty for actually causing a miscarriage if the fetus was fully formed. In the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas made extensive use of Aristotle's thought, including his theory that the human soul is not present until a few weeks before pregnancy. But even as that issue of when does the soul enter the body, it is clear that he says a grave wrong is done at any stage, observing that it is a sin against nature to reject God's gift of new life. From the 13th to the 19th centuries, some theologians began to speculate about rare and difficult cases where they thought an abortion before formation or ensoulment might be morally justified. But these theories were discussed and then always rejected. It's very important to understand, as the church refined and reaffirmed its understanding of abortion as an intrinsic evil act that can never be morally right. And then, of course, as I note in the pastoral letter, in 1827, with the discovery of the human ovum, the mistaken biology of Aristotle was discredited. Scientists increasingly understood that the union of sperm and egg at conception produces a new living being, and this is what is so important from the biological point of view. A new and distinct being that is different from the mother and the father. Modern genetics demonstrated that this individual is, at the outset, distinctly human, with the inherent and active potential to mature into a human fetus, infant, child, and adult. From 1869 onward, the obsolete distinction between the ensouled and the unensouled fetus was permanently removed from both canon law and the intellectual thought regarding abortion. What's also very fascinating is, as biology is continuing to learn more and more and grow, secular laws against abortion were being reformed at the same time. And in the same way, based on secular medical experts' realization that no other doctrine appears to be in union with reason or physiology, but that one which admits the embryo to possess vitality from the very moment of conception. Now, this is a medical journal. I found this in the American Medical Association report on criminal abortion, and this is 1871. So in 1871, with the advances in science, the secular world itself is saying, wait a minute here. We're realizing something and codifying it, even the prohibition, into secular law. Because, so to speak, they were following the science. Thus, modern science has not changed the church's constant teaching against abortion, but I think, to be underscored, isn't it true? The more and more that science continues to grow, and as technology continues to expand, the scientific world, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many others, is doing nothing more than advancing the pro-life stance. The more we're learning about genetics at the earliest stages of fertilization and understanding on those genetic levels the uniqueness and the differentiation of each of those unique human beings. Genetics and science, properly understood and embraced, I believe becomes an even stronger ally to the pro-life movement. And that's why, if you notice today, and it's, I know, not a surprise to any of you, that the language we hear more and more on a pro-choice stance is about health care. And I often say, one of the great atrocities in using that term healthcare is that the pregnancy that has occurred because one is healthy. There is not an unhealthiness to the situation. But the twisting of linguistics and the reality of science are not consistent. We know that. But yet, in our world today, given the scientific fact that a human life begins at conception, the only moral norm needed to understand the Church's opposition to abortion is the principle that each and every human life has an inherent dignity and thus must be treated with respect due to the nature that it is a human person. This is the foundation for the Church's social doctrine, and it's the foundation on which all of our social doctrines rest, including our teaching on war, capital punishment, euthanasia, healthcare, poverty, immigration. Conversely, to claim that some live human being does not deserve respect or should not be treated as persons based on changeable factors as age, condition, location, or lack of mental or physical abilities is to deny the very idea of inherent human rights. Such a claim undermines respect for the lives of many vulnerable people before and after birth. Many of you have been involved for nearly 50 years in the pro-life movement here in the United States and beyond. In those early years, many in the church and in this movement would say, if we embrace this understanding of allowing for abortion and a lack of respect for that newborn life in the womb, it will only begin to be the gateway to a greater degradation of a respect for human life. And it is almost prophetic that as we look at our culture and our world today, the challenges we face, not only with end-of-life issues, but as we look at how human disabilities, physically and mentally, and now dare I even say emotionally, are being judged. Does one have a right to life in all stages and in all ways? Well, many other examples could be offered. I believe, my brothers and sisters, that the point is that our church from the beginning has consistently upheld the sanctity of life of the unborn child and has condemned the act of direct abortion. To oppose this teaching contradicts the revelation of sacred scripture and the Christian tradition. My dear friends, as we, as a nation and as a world, as we look at this important issue, we understand, as I have stated, and I am convinced believe, what the church teaches and has consistently taught. We understand the first part of Bishop Kulik's tag team heroes. We theoretically, philosophically, and theologically, as exemplified in Pope St. John Paul, have articulated greatly the Church's unchanging tradition. But my dear brothers and sisters, I think the great challenge that is now before us is we can't stay in our heads. We can't stay behind our theses or the lectern. I can't simply, as a bishop, nor any bishop, or even you as a professor, we no longer can just simply state this and say, okay, here's the test, answer all the questions correctly. Because it's not working. When we have people who have gone through our schools, our universities, who've earned degrees, who are extremely intelligent, and they're on the front lines saying, oh, that's nice, but it's not being made real in the lived experience. How do we become, you and I, having embraced the John Paul, how do you and I become the Mother Teresa? How do you and I make what we think, what we believe, what we teach, what we preach, how do we make that real? And how do we change hearts? I think that's where we have to look now to the model of Mother Teresa and hundreds and thousands like her, many of which who are nowhere near as famous or known. But in the simple interactions of daily life, in the simple and sublime ways of living the corporal works of mercy, they exhibit human compassion, human respect, and human dignity. We have to be missionaries in the world. We have to be Respect Life missionaries. We can't sit in the choir stalls or in the office buildings. We can't just issue letters, write books, give theses, dare I say even make video blogs, Snapchat posts. I'm absolutely convinced we have got to be, as the Holy Father reminds us, out with the people. We have to make an investment of time and energy. And that's a much, much harder road to hoe, because that demands the ministry of our presence, the sacrifice of our time, and the integrity of our lifestyle. And yet, that's what we must do. I am absolutely convinced that the power of prayer is essential, of course, in all that we do. We need to take time to pray. We need to make time to pray. We have to help and teach each other how to pray. You know, I do believe, I was just on a Zoom call today with the USCCB. They're doing some new reports, and it's going to be some interesting things coming out. And believe me, I think the Conference of Catholic Bishops, a lot of times, I know I'm on the radio, so I have to be very careful. But, you know, like all of us, we don't always get everything right, do we? Sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we get it really wrong. But, you know, I do believe historically, probably one of the greatest combined efforts that will be seen historically in the United States through the leadership of the Conference of Catholic Bishops have been the progress we made in Respect Life. We integrated prayer into the devotional life of our schools, our catechetical programs, our devotional worship. We integrated petitions week after week into our liturgies. We made wonderful observances of pro-life months, marches. We put time, energy, and resources into political and philosophical advocacy. We made it a priority. And you know, we changed culture to a certain degree. We changed hearts and minds. But we did that in a period of time, I think many of you would agree, when pedagogy was much different. Society was very different. Families were very different. Parish life was very different. We succeeded in many ways. But I absolutely am convinced we must now pivot into a very new approach for this cause and for the work of evangelization. And that must be experiential immersion in what I like to say is the evangelization effort. People are hungering and longing for social interaction. Studies will show us over and over again that while technology is increasing, while virtual reality is exponentially growing, people are feeling more lonely, more isolated, more confused, and more perplexed than ever. What is the great treasury of our Catholic tradition, the Christian tradition? Relationality. When we think about incarnation, I often say this, when we come off the Feast of the Angels, the archangels and the guardian angels, I always say, the Savior didn't come as an angel. Could have, but he didn't. He came as a human being, taking on flesh in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And in taking on that flesh in the womb of the Virgin Mary, he came into our human condition, and by that very nature, formed a relationship with all of humanity. A relationship that was not tied to temporal space, but a relationship that lives on in the sacramental encounter given to the church as the custodian. And that mystery and that beauty of the incarnation continues to live and be manifested in the bold proclamation of the gospel. But we, I contend, have to now allow that mystery of the incarnation to be a model for us. We have to bring Christ enfleshed to the world, not hypothetically, not even, I dare say, academically alone. We have to form relationships that are true Christian relationships. People are hungering to find God. I so often say, and I get very excited about this, that I think we're in a period, Dr. Weigel talked about this last year, I think it was, time goes by so fast, maybe it was 2 years ago, with his talking about the epics of church history, major pivotal changes in the church's earthly experience. And he talked about how we're really in an epic turn right now. And that excites me because I believe in many ways, just as in the early church, the culture is handing us a magnificent gift. And they might say, Bishop, did you just have a stroke halfway through this presentation? What do you mean the culture is handing you a gift? Don't you see what's going on? It's terrible. Everything's polarized. People are screaming at each other. No one can even agree on terms. We can't even agree on pronouns today. And you say, what do you mean it's handing you a gift? And I say, it's handing us a tremendous gift. Because what it's doing, it's making the Christian message and the Christian truth so apparently different and so clear in contrast that in many ways, if we just proclaim what we believe, it's going to be like a bright light shining in the darkness. And again, I go back to the early church. It's going to draw people because they are looking for that truth. Tied into this whole understanding of respect life and how do we move forward now and how do we counter, especially in a post-Dobbs era for us in the United States, we've got to put our money where our mouth is. We've got to live the gospel of life with integrity. And you know what? We've got to be energetic about it and unapologetic about it, but authentic. That's I think, where it is the beautiful sort of tightrope that we walk. Because, as I said, it demands a lot of personal energy and investment. But at the same time, when people, like in the early church, see the Christian faith authentically lived and, in instances, died for, the church grows and the church expands. And I think we're on the wonderful cusp of a great period of potential tremendous evangelization. But of course, with that also comes cross and sacrifice. I was telling today we had a wonderful talk with, I had a mass with the representatives of the Catholic schools across the diocese. We filled the whole cathedral. So I was in the midst of my homily talking about some things, and sometimes how the cross comes to us in many ways. And I was telling about my experience in Rome, and I said, here were the American bishops, first world, So we get there, it's 92 degrees, and in the 90s the first 4 days. So of course, what is there? No air conditioning. Windows are open with no screens, so the mosquitoes are just having a wonderful time. So we're there about day number 3. And of course, a small group of Americans are saying, oh God, it's hot. I'm saying, I'm taking 2 showers a day. I'm getting an hour and a half sleep. I can't sleep. The pillow's soft. And I said, one of the guys who's tall said, half my body's off the bed. And we're going, yeah. Oh, the crosses of all of us in the first world, And in the midst of our conversation, there was a bishop who was sitting there, sort of by himself. So we brought him over into the discussion, and he had sort of a somber look on his face. And so we were, thinking, oh, he too must be hot, having a bad night, not getting a lot of sleep. Well, as we entered into our discussion, we found out that he was from Nicaragua. And he began to tell us in Spanish that Mother Teresa's sisters have been expelled. As many of you know, there's great political strife right now in the country. Many of the priests and almost all of the missionaries have been expelled. And he said, I'm really concerned. I was able to come here and I got out of the country. I don't think I'm going to be able to get back in. And he said, I'm not going to be able to go back to my diocese. I'm not going to be able to be a shepherd. I'm not going to be able to have Mass in my own country. And of course, I think all of us at that moment sort of put down our heads and thought, well, maybe the heat isn't too bad and maybe the mosquitoes aren't too bad. But I think about that because you know what that was for me? A real immersion into an experiential evangelization moment. He evangelized to us with his sincerity and in that human connectivity that I think probably changed all of us and the way in which we look at things, hopefully for the rest of our lives, because we really realized that what we thought was so dire and what our conversation was joking about was nothing compared to the cross he was experiencing. And I use that example because I think those kinds of continual pastoral, personal interventions are what we have to do all the time. We have to listen to people. We have to walk with them and accompany them. And I know we have a lot of seminarians here tonight, and thank you for being here. Be assured of our prayers, and how really proud the church is of you discerning this vocation. But you've got to be with the people. You've got to walk with them. You've got to be present to them. You're going to lead the example of a new evangelization. And that's what's going to be so important for the work that we do. So, as we look at where we are historically, as we look at where we are right now, as we all know, moving into a tenuous time with midterm elections and all of the different voices that we're hearing, We know what the church teaches. We know the clarity of it. We shouldn't in any way hold back from proclaiming that, teaching it authentically. But along with that, we also have to live it. We have to, like Mother Teresa, pick up the dying off the streets. We have to feed the hungry. We have to do everything we can in a world today which is just so horribly attacking human dignity at all levels. Because when we do that, then we have not only a consistent ethic of life, but we have an authenticity that will resound. One of the things that I sort of smile as I was having a discussion, not in this diocese, but in another, with a group of religious, and they, of course, were saying, the church so many times, they use the word obsesses about abortion and pro-life, and meanwhile we have immigration, we have health care, we have all of these things, and that's all so important. And I said to them, it's all very important. But respect for life is the preeminent life issue. It's first. And the example that I use is this. I sort of thought about this, and see if you like it to conclude with. I can be down under the bridge working with the homeless, and I'm feeding the poor. I'm bandaging the wounds of the afflicted. I'm working with immigration processes to get the migrants and refugees into housing and solid work. And all of a sudden, I look up, and off the side of the bridge is falling this infant. I'm going to lay down the sandwich cart. I'm going to lay down the bags. I'm going to lay down the immigration forms. And what am I going to do? I'm going to catch the baby. Then after I catch the baby, I'm going to go back to feeding the poor, helping the sick, and giving rest to the weary. We're not going to let the baby hit the ground and say, oh, I'm sorry, I was feeding the poor, I was curing the sick, I was helping someone get a house. I like that imagery, you may agree or disagree, when it comes to the preeminence of a respect for human life. Because without the dignity and the protection of the unborn, without the protection of human life, no other rights will exist if a person is not alive. And so, as I conclude this presentation tonight, and I want to open it up for some questions that you may have, I ask your help in each of your respective positions, vocations. Help me to bring that gift of life to the most vulnerable and needy. Help me be a missionary, disciple to the world, proclaiming the gospel of life. Help me to help our brothers and sisters know and cherish in every stage from the moment of conception to natural death the gift of human life and how precious it is. Because ultimately, there's a majority of us here who've given our lives to God in vows and consecration, and all of us through baptism have been consecrated to God. In all of our lives and all of our work, we share one very important common vocation, the call to sainthood. And when we go before the judgment seat of God, I so often say, yeah, I sometimes worry about the sins I've committed. I think we all do. But the older I get, the more I reflect on my sins of omission. And I think the Lord's going to say to me, yeah, you worried about this. What have you failed to do? I think particularly as clerics and religious, sometimes the greater thing is not what we have done, but maybe what we have failed to do. And I think about that in regards to working for the sanctity of human life. When the Lord says to us, what have you done? Well, I was busy. I was, paying the electric bills. I was, doing this, doing that. Let's work together so that when we come one day before Almighty God, we might say, Lord, there's a lot I got wrong and a lot I didn't do right. But let's stand before the judgment seat of God and say, doggone it, I tried to the best of my ability. And it started with a respect for my fellow brothers and sisters. I want to certainly... I'd love to open this up for some questions, and Father Max is going to help us here. We have, oh my, this is like the Clementine Chapel here. But I have to say it's a little cooler. Come on, stump the bishop. Okay.
About a month ago, I read your article, and I was amazed at not only how broad it was, but it was how well written. And I agreed with everything. Something always hit me. There's something very, very missing. And this is, I'm happy that you spoke about science. I'm a son, brother, and uncle of scientists, so I appreciate it. Then in this room, we have lots and lots of theology. We also have philosophy here. And the reason I bring this up is the fact is somebody can listen to you and dismiss instantly almost everything you said. And who is that person? The atheist. Mm-hmm. I no longer think of the atheist as the enemy. But I have to ask my question philosophically, what is the value of an atheist? And I've narrowed it down to 3 areas. One, the person. I think, therefore, I am important. Mm-hmm. Then it's humanity altogether. And then beyond that, the cosmos, the ecology, and so forth. Don't step on the ant on the sidewalk, things like that. And I think of the 3, the most destructive is the one, the atheist would believe the greatest value is the individual. So I think there needs to be an appeal for the value of life, and the caution is as soon as you say, which I don't disagree with, that life is sacred, people get turned off. Mm-hmm. And I just think that needs to be brought into the picture, as well as the society which has that separation of church and state. Oh, this is religion, but we're dealing with the laws of the land. I just want that statement to generate some thoughts.
Thanks, Father Alford. I agree with you. And if you notice, one time, one of my great spiritual directors here at St. Vincent's, I was talking to him about something. And he said, Larry, your experiences should not only teach you what to do, they should also teach you what not to do. I think about that so often. And one of the things I often say is, how many times I would be on the other side and I'd say, oh God, the bishops are issuing a pastoral letter. How many volumes is it? And you lose yourself after paragraph 3. So one of the things, Father Alfred, that I try to do, and getting ready to release another letter this week probably, on the importance of informing conscience in exercising our civil rights of voting, how important it is to inform conscience on issues and bring that into our whole civil duty. But part of that was to keep the pastoral letter short. But I completely agree with you. And I think there are a lot of ways that we look, even today, at some of the things that we're dealing with that might be what I often say. I always say if I was running for public office, which I never would, You know what my logo would be? Bring back common sense. Just bring back common sense. But I think one of the things that I was thinking about when you talked about that is just using logic. And I know today it's hard to use logic because everyone's taught using emotion as the language. But I was thinking about this even in what we're experiencing right now with the population drops. You know, I was in Italy, like many of you. I hadn't been there for 10 years. One of the things I noticed is, well, two things I noticed. I didn't see many late middle-aged or older people. I was telling Father Paul and some of the students about this. In Rome, maybe it was I just wasn't in the right places, but you know, before you'd see the older ladies throwing the water out, or you'd go into the restaurants and you'd see the middle-aged or older maitre d's that had been there for 30 years in the restaurant. It just seemed like all you saw was younger people, which isn't a bad thing. But I asked someone and they said, well, two things happened. Especially in the major cities in Italy, COVID had a huge mortality rate among the late middle-aged and older people. It was a horrific death rate due to COVID. Secondly, many of the people who were in the city working, the government, because they were in the industry, they were face-to-face with people, gave them early retirement because they were in constant particular health danger. So they've sort of evacuated their thing. But what I noticed in going into all the restaurants and looking at the streets, it was an immigrant world. You know, the number of even Italians that you saw, like I went into the religious goods stores, you used to see, you know, Mario, and he'd measure you up for whatever you need. Now it's India, Pakistan, Africa. The point being what we see here in the United States right now, no workforce, the challenges of many things. I think, Father Alfred, what you're saying is, like, what are the effects of this? Let's just even take this out of maybe the moral, if I dare say, for a moment, and the philosophical realm in its sense, but just think about the natural human consequences of what we're doing in regards to abortion, and even in regards to contraception. I mean, we're contracepting ourselves, and now we're starting to see we don't have workforces, we don't have people, we don't have a lot of things. So long story, I agree with you. Thank you for that. And I think as we move forward with some other things, that's a great way of thinking at it. How do we look at people? One of the reasons I did the pastoral letter, part of the concern was I was sensing as a bishop, there's growing confusion on where the church stands, and that somehow we are changing or can change this position. Because what's happening is people who claim to be Catholic are voicing opinions that somehow make themselves that they're speaking in the name of the church or for the church, and that's confusing people today very much. Good point.
Bishop Larry, thank you for your presentation this evening. I really appreciated the image you proposed to us of this tension between John Paul and Mother Teresa, between knowledge and action. And I also love the tension between that sort of little liturgical note you put in there of what we've done and what we've failed to do in terms of this topic of abortion and the pro-life message. Could you just speak into a little bit for us how to broach the topic with other Catholics, whether we're priests in the parish or religious here at the Abbey, college students in the school, men in formation for the priesthood, how to broach the topic of the clear teaching of the Church on abortion and, for example, Speaker Pelosi or President Biden, who are Catholic and who at times have portrayed themselves as faithful Catholics. How do we broach this topic in a way that lives in that tension between John Paul and Mother Teresa and still be crystal clear? Thank you.
Sure. I go back to what I say in like an experiential, coming to an understanding of something more and more from an experiential point of view. Certainly, I always say that I think one of the reasons I have found myself being strongly pro-life is a couple of things. First of all, was a family experience. You know, being raised in an intact family with some siblings and in a community where family life, and don't get me wrong, you know, none of us lived in the Leave It to Beaver scenario, you know, especially if you were in the immigrant world. Everyone had their crazy uncle that lived in the Putka out back, or, you know, would get drunk and you'd have to bring him in, you know, all those. No one was perfect. But there was within that family structure a discipline and even more so a respect for each other. You know, how many times did you say, boy, if you'd say something smart to your mother, what would your dad do? Hey, wham, respect your mother. She's your mother. Or, you know, if your younger brother or your younger sister would want to, tag along, and hey, respect your brother and your sister. And so I think one of the challenges experientially today is that we are in many ways that whole family structure where you start to learn to respect each other and respect your elders, respect your colleagues, is really dissolving. So we have that. For me, that was part of what I would say helped to form my understanding of an overall respect for life and dignity of the human person. It started, so to speak, at home. Secondly, was parish life. You lived and respected people, knowing they were very different, but you lived in an environment, and as I said, growing up, you were hearing the message in the liturgies and in the prayers of the church's life. You had wonderful education systems. You know, we weren't taught in the school things that were opposite, but in many points, we were being affirmed. And believe me, I was taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph. You know, they were not the most conservative group of women religious at the time. But in that intellectual tradition, with a magnificent progressive way, they really forged us in a respect for the dignity of the human person from the moment of conception to natural death, so that there was a consistency and a continuity across the board. And then, of course, coming into the Benedictine tradition, it was the fraternity, the respect people had for each other, you know, helping the older brothers or helping, you know, the younger brothers in fraternal correction. Community life was lived. But I'll tell you, I had all of that, and I could tell you everything I preached, and if I was to have an essay or comprehensives, I could give you, Father Justin knows, I could give you the natural law position and come out with the right answer. But one of the turning points for me that probably was a revolutionary moment in my own life was my youngest brother. Now, I was the oldest. I had twin sisters, and I had a younger brother. Well, of course, as you know, in a family system, the oldest one always has to follow all the laws, has the strictest thing, and then it gets a little liberal. Well, of course, my brother, by the time there were 6 years difference, I used to say to my mom and dad, I said, why does he want to do anything? He's living a life of like being retired. He gets everything. You bring the food up to him. He didn't have to do all the summer jobs we had, and everyone else is out of the house, so he has 3 bedrooms, and, you know. So I love my brother dearly, but there was sort of a very different ideological sort of thought that we shared in that. My brother got married, and about a year into his marriage, he came to me and he said, we're expecting a child. And I said, well, congratulations. And he said, Larry, he said, things aren't good. He said his wife was about 6 or 7 months pregnant, 6 or 7 weeks pregnant, starting to have some problems, might be a miscarriage. So we were praying. Well, at about the 2-month point, he came back and he said, the doctor, who was her doctor, said that the child was hydrocephalic, that there was a problem with the development of the brain. The fluid was building up. It was compressing the brain, and that they believed the child would not live to term. So they presented at month 3. And not only presented, but they said, you must abort this child. So he came to me and he said, there's no way we're going to abort this child. Well, here I was already a priest, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, wow, yeah, is that my brother, you know? It got so bad that her doctor, refused to continue to care for her if she wouldn't abort the child. So I fortunately got her connected with some of the Sisters of Mercy and got her into Mercy Hospital. She found a doctor that would support this. They reached the 6-month point of the pregnancy. They said, it's child's never gonna be born alive. Got to abort. Or not. No, Mercy didn't say this. Her friends were saying this. I want to make that clear. The team at Mercy was very, very supportive. She had the child. Indeed, it was born hydrocephalic. I was there the day it was born. Immediately put a stent into the child's head. They said, child's not going to live a month. Month came. Josh was alive and growing. Well, he's not going to live 6 months. 6 months came. He was alive. Well, he'll never see a year. Never see a year. Never see a year. I remember his first birthday. Brought out the cake. Well, he'll be dead by 5. He continued to grow. And at 6, they had to put a new shunt in his head because the one they had was more for an infant. Josh is 23 next week. Now, Josh doesn't walk. Josh can't talk. But what I saw was my brother, who was so self-absorbed, at least my impression of it was, not only mature along with his wife in a way that was, in my mind, saintly, but they together have lived a life of love and care for that child for 23 years. And the transformation I have seen in them in regards to the unselfishness of their life and the priorities they place because of that child's life has changed the hearts and minds of many, myself included. I just had an opportunity last week to zoom in, and Josh's sister is now at Clemson and is in anesthesiology school and has gone on not to have one semester under a 4.0. And my brother finds great joy, too, in his daughter, who's very successful in that way. To respond to your question, I think it's very challenging when we have people who say that they're speaking or holding positions that are contrary to the church's position. I think we have to say, no, that's not what the church teaches. That's not what the church preaches. And you know, one of the problems I have with that, theologically, is that understanding of communio that goes beyond just thinking about who we are. But how are we brought together in common union? And I think in many instances, these people who want to philosophically or politically make these statements We know their positions are absolutely wrong. They're contrary to church teaching. They've really placed themselves outside of communion with the church. How do we respond to that? I think we have to, as the Holy Father would say, I think we have to look at it in each individual case. I think we have to be very careful that, again, what have I done or what have I failed to do? But I go back to saying, I think sometimes I feel very sad for these people because they haven't had experiences to really come to a true conversion of understanding why we believe what we believe and missing out on opportunities to grow in understanding how when we really follow what the church teaches, it opens up doors that we can't even ever imagine. And I think about that with my brother. I don't think my brother would be half the person, half the man, half the father, half the saint, may I dare say, or on the way to sainthood, that he would be without embracing that something hit in his formation. And he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk, but in having the courage to do that, his life has been transformed. Has it been easy? Absolutely not. I look at him, I said, Eric, why aren't you standing up straight? He says, oh, my back hurts because I have to carry Josh. And he's almost 120 pounds now. He lifts him into the car, out of the car. So I think we all have experiences like that. And I think they fortify our positions. They convince us. But how do we convince others? That's, Father, part of the challenge, I think, that we have to face. It's a tough challenge. But I think, too, we have to say very clearly, these people are outside the communio. And being outside the communio, the Holy Father said something to us as bishops. He was talking about a number of the priests that under these, horrific situations have been, have had to obviously leave the church. And the Holy Father said something to us that really stuck with me. He said, our priests, even though they have done horrific things, and injustice must be accountable for those. Don't forget that God still wants them to be saved. And he wants them to be with him in heaven. How do we reach out to them to save their souls? And I think that's what we have to say to some of these people. When you take some of these hard stances and you are actually moving then across the line, not even into policy, but by your policies, I would say you are beginning formal cooperation in certain ways. We have to work even harder to reach out to them for the salvation of their souls. And not just demonize them as a political enemy, but reach out to them and help to convert their heart and their soul. And I think, in fairness to some of the bishops that have been dealing with some of these individuals, I do, and I know bishops have really, really tried to sit down and have conversations, and that would be the approach. But I also think sometimes we have to call a spade a spade. Father?
I was just about to ask you a practical question.
Yes, Father Afternoon. Now, you're the moral theologian. I am a humble nothing, but...
How would you instruct a young priest who refused a non-abortionist communion, and his bishop tells him, it is not your place to legislate morality?
We're on radio, too. I believe the church has, now you're talking to a canonist, right? So as a moral theologian to a canonist, I believe in my discipline as you do. I believe that the law is there to guide us, and the law is there to support the theology of the church. We have an important obligation as teachers of the faith and as pastor of souls to make sure that we are proclaiming the truth as the church teaches, and that we are shepherding as the church teaches. Not as we may feel, but as the church teaches. I believe that in instances where we are in situations, I think the most important thing would be to enter into what the world is looking for, and what we don't want to have is division. And they're going to look at it and say, if there's division between a bishop and one of his priests, aha, there it is. And I'll be honest, Father Affinugo, right now, one of the things that really worries me in the tension that we have is that we're creating more division. And then that becomes a real challenge to continuity, and I think it confuses people. I think a lot of people are confused today. And just the point I'm making, what does the church teach? What doesn't it? Let me answer your question in this. I think a bishop has an obligation to a brother priest to dialogue and to a great responsibility between themselves to come to a consensus that they can agree on and together work for a pastoral application to how to do this. Now, I know that's the theoretical and it becomes hard. That would be my hope, and that would be my approach. I also think that the church law is there and it guides us, and we use it as we can. But the division is, to me, the sad thing is people are looking for us to be divided. They're looking for us to be divided. So I think it would be good to have dialogue. What happens if you can't come to consensus? That's the challenge.
What is stopping the Bishops' Conference from giving that directive?
I think that the bishops want to be able to speak in one voice, and I think the bishops are very conscientious that they do not want to be agents of division. And I think that there are, obviously, to be very candid, some differing opinions right now within the conference. And I think the conference, for the sake of not wanting to be divisive or give a notion of divisiveness, are trying to deal with this each. And I think the Holy Father has sort of said, as you look at synodality, I think he's saying each bishop is ultimately responsible for the pastoral care of his diocese. And so I think all of us in our minds take that obligation very seriously and would do that. That's where, I don't know if that answers your question. I can't sort of read the minds of all the bishops, but I think in general the bishops want to uphold the church's integrity in its teaching and don't want division. Yes.
Thank you, Bishop.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bishop, for everything. I'm going to use your microphone here, standing next to you. I can project. There we go. Okay. Bishop, thank you for your presentation and your welcoming of questions and your answers that you gave to us. And we will conclude this. But if people would like to ask you some questions, you'll stick around for a little bit.
Sure.
So again, thank you, Bishop Kulik, for your wisdom and your presence and your leadership. We're grateful that a triple Bearcat
Yes.
is with us.
We were
and-
talking, how can you be a triple Bearcat without the prep, right?
That's right. So your bachelor's degree in philosophy and your 2 master's degrees from St. Vincent.
Yeah. See, that's how we do it.
We're proud that you
Triple
you
Bearcat
bear
without the
those
prep.
and carry those forward in evangelization. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you all for attending.
And I want to again thank Archabbot Martin. Thank you, as always, for this wonderful invitation. You, Father Paul, representing the Archabbey, the college, and Father Ed representing the seminary, the triple Bearcats. And it's always a pleasure to be here. And I really mean that. I am very humbled and honored to be able to be here. I really love this community, but also I see St. Vincent's and the monastery as a powerful reservoir of prayer, not only for our diocese, but beyond. And so thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support. And all the seminarians, thank you for your openness to discern God's will. To all of our collegians that are here tonight, thank you for being a part of the future leadership of our church and our society. And to all the guests who